Chapter 2. Soccer got the children settled inside his grandmother's igloo. "Don't come out until I tell you it's safe," he said sternly. The children all nodded and huddled together anxiously. "Is something wrong?" the cloaked boy asked. "Should I come?" "No," Katara replied quickly. "Please wait here." As Soccer and Katara stepped towards the igloo doorway, Katara looked back at the mysterious boy. Leaning his tall staff against the wall, he turned to the frightened group of children. "Don't worry," he said, smiling. "I'm sure there's nothing wrong." He pulled a handful of stones from the pocket of his cloak. "Who wants to play a game?" he asked. The children gathered around the boy, who kneeled down and tossed the stones onto the floor. Katara turned and joined her brother outside. They were terrified to see massive Fire Nation metal warships docked at the edge of the village. Fire Nation soldiers marched off the ships and through the village. Some villagers bowed respectfully, others cowered in fear. Soccer and Katara paused as the group of soldiers approached. "It can't be a coincidence that we break that kid out of the ice and light shoots into the sky, and now the Fire Nation is here," Soccer said anxiously. As the line of marching soldiers reached him, Soccer's hand moved slowly to his boomerang. He gripped it tightly. "Soccer, don't," Katara whispered urgently. Soccer fought back his anger and the urge to strike out at these soldiers. He thought of the pain and destruction they had already brought down on his family, his people, and the whole world. The soldier at the front of the platoon pulled off his helmet, revealing a youthful yet hardened face. A burn scar ran along the left side of his face. "I am Prince Zuko, son of Fire Lord Ozai, and heir to the throne of the Fire Nation," the young soldier announced to the frightened villagers. "Bring me all your elderly." None of the villagers moved, so the Fire Nation soldiers went from igloo to igloo, pulling the eldest members of the tribe out of their homes. When a Fire Nation soldier arrived with Soccer and Katara's grandmother, Katara's face stiffened. She opened her hands and focused her mind. A small snowdrift near her feet began to swirl into a funnel shape. The mini tornado rose towards her hands. Soccer glanced down and noticed the rising snow. "Katara, don't," he whispered. His sister allowed the snow to fall harmlessly back to the ground. Back in the igloo, a child tossed a stone into a group of other stones that were placed in a circle. The other children near him all cheered. "You're good at that," said the cloaked boy, who was leading the game. "Now I'll show you one of my favourite games." A shadow fell over him as a Fire Nation soldier stepped into the igloo. He stared at the boy for a moment, then pulled off his cloak, revealing the arrow-shaped tattoo running across his head. He grabbed the boy and pulled him outside as the children huddled together in fear. Back outside, Katara leaned close to her brother. "What do they want with the elders?" she whispered. Before Soccer could reply, the soldier pulled the tattooed boy and shoved him in front of Prince Zuko. Katara's eyes opened wide. "You're scaring these people," the cloaked boy said firmly. "That's the point," Prince Zuko replied. He stared at the strange-looking boy. "Who are you? What's your name?" "I don't need to tell you anything," the boy snarled defiantly, staring right at Zuko. The prince turned to his troops. "Firebenders!" he shouted. A group of soldiers stepped forward and immediately surrounded the boy. Then Prince Zuko pointed at his metal warship. "I'm taking you to my ship, and if you don't come, I'll burn down this village." The boy looked around at the terrified faces of the villagers. Then his eyes met Katara's. "I'll go with you," he said softly. "Don't hurt anyone. 2 Fire Nation soldiers grabbed the boy and roughly herded him towards their ship. Sokka and Katara both ran after him. A firebender lifted his leg and kicked out swiftly. The movement sent a column of flames from a nearby cooking fire rushing towards them. "Stay back!" the firebender shouted as the fire passed just inches above their heads. They stopped and watched helplessly as the soldiers dragged the boy away. Prince Zuko and his troops marched back into their ship. Its mighty engines roared to life and the fleet departed as quickly as they had arrived. As Sokka and Katara headed back to their igloo, a mournful wailing sound filled the air. Inside their igloo, Sokka paced back and forth, fingering his boomerang and trying to figure out what, if anything, to do next. "That Prince Zuko," Katara snarled. "If I ever see him again, he and I are going to have a real problem." Outside, Appa once again wailed in distress. "They were looking for someone old," Sokka said, continuing his nervous pacing. Then for some reason they realised it was this boy they wanted. Again, Appa's mournful cry drifted into the igloo. Katara sat fuming. "That prince walked around like he owned our village," she said angrily. "When are we going to stand up to them? We can't just let them take whoever they want. They took Mom the same way." She paused as memories of her mother flooded her mind. This time she chose to focus on the ones that fueled her rage. "We have to save that boy Sokka," she said, the conviction clear in her voice. Sokka stopped his pacing and thought hard. "How are we supposed to get him?" he asked. "They are on a ship. They are miles away by now. We can paddle all we want in our canoe, but we're never going to catch them." Appa's cries sounded again, but this time they were accompanied by the sounds of children laughing and shrieking with joy. Sokka and Katara looked at each other for a moment, wondering what was going on. They stepped out of their igloo to see. The sight that greeted them outside caused them both to stare in stunned amazement. Appa was floating several feet off the ground. Village children hung from his legs and tail, screeching with delight. "His bison creature thing floats," Katara said, her eyes open wide with delight. Sokka smiled. "Now that could probably catch the ship," he said, a plan already forming in his mind. "All we have to do is convince Grandma to let us go," Katara said. "Come on." They rushed back to their igloo and began gathering supplies. In addition to clothing, cooking items and sleeping rolls, Katara also took a small leather pouch filled with water. Sokka brought his boomerang. They stopped next at their grandmother's igloo, where they found her stirring a bubbling stew in a large iron pot. "Are you going to try and stop us, Grandma?" Katara asked when she'd finished explaining their plan. "Sit down, children," Grandma said. Sokka and Katara glanced at each other and then sat down on either side of her. "Do you believe we all have a destiny?" Grandma asked. Sokka and Katara both nodded. "I knew from the moment we discovered you were a bender, Katara, that I would one day learn your destiny," Grandma continued. "There hasn't been a waterbender in the Southern Water Tribe since my friend Hammer was taken away. Today, I realised your destiny." Katara felt her stomach tense up, yet her mind raced with possibilities. "Did you see that boy's tattoos?" Grandma asked. "Tattoos like that haven't been seen in almost a century. I could be wrong, but I believe they are airbending tattoos." She paused for a moment, stirring the pot of stew and allowing the significance of what she had just said to sink in. Then she continued, "Sokka and Katara, I think you may have found the Avatar." Her grandchildren remained still, unable to speak, their minds reeling from this announcement. She continued, The fact that you found him tells me that your destinies are tied to his. He will need you too, and we all need him." She stopped stirring and leaned in close to her grandchildren. "Now I could be wrong," she said, smiling for the first time, "but I think you're about to go on a great adventure. Promise me one thing, that you will both come back to me safely." Socket and Katara leaned into their grandmother's arms. Katara thought about the daunting task ahead, but also about how much she loved her brother and her grandmother. All three of them held one another tightly in a warm embrace that none of them wanted to end. Okay, chapter 3 tomorrow.